Clear!
Clear.
When it was released in 1982, John Carpenter's The Thing was so heavily criticised by critics that he admitted feeling like everyone hated me at the time of its release. The film tells the story of a group of scientists in Antarctica who discover a terrifying alien creature capable of mimicking anyone, shattering trust and cooperation among them. The isolated, frigid and deeply paranoid atmosphere creates a haunting psychological horror experience, forcing viewers to question who is still human and who has been transformed by the creature. Over the years, the film was re-evaluated and became a horror masterpiece. Beyond its dark and haunting content, The Thing hides countless secrets that leave fans astonished. Kurt Russell nearly killed himself in the final explosion scene. The entire plot was revealed in the opening scene, and some chilling scenes were cut that almost no one has ever seen. Are you curious about the secrets of The Thing? Let's explore the 15 most fascinating facts about The Thing in the following video. 15. Many scenes were cut. During production, Carpenter and his team shot, or at least prepared to shoot, many extended scenes that further explained the Thing creature. However, most of these scenes were ultimately removed from the final cut, not because they were of poor quality, but because Carpenter wanted to maintain the tense, suffocating and ambiguous pacing of the film. One of the most famous cutscenes is the appearance of the creature called the Box Monster. According to surviving storyboards, the scene shows the character Knowles checking the storeroom and being attacked by a creature that bursts from the darkness. This effect, jokingly named the Box Monster by the special effects team, was designed by Rob Bottin's crew. However, only a small part of the scene was completed because Carpenter felt the complex effect didn't truly fit with the realistic, body-focused style of the other monsters in the film. The Box Monster scene was ultimately removed, leaving Knowles' fate ambiguous, a decision that inadvertently made the character more memorable. Additionally, there was a stop-motion sequence by artist Randall William Cook showing the Blair Thing in its final transformation stage. Although this stop-motion effect was considered creative, Carpenter felt it was too mechanical and did not align with the handcrafted style of the rest of the film. To maintain visual consistency, he cut nearly the entire sequence, keeping only a few seconds during the climax when the creature appears underground. Many dialogue scenes were also removed for being too wordy. Carpenter explained that he wanted audiences to feel fear through glances, atmosphere, and the silence between characters rather than unnecessary dialogue. Many extended scenes developing relationships among researchers at Outpost 31 were removed to keep the film tense and never allow the audience to feel safe even briefly. Finally, the alternate ending is what has made the post-production of The Thing a topic of debate for decades. Another version was filmed in which MacReady is rescued, tested for infection, and proves he is uninfected. However, Carpenter felt this ending was too obvious and cheesy, losing the ambiguity and despair he wanted to portray. Instead, he kept the scene of two men, MacReady and Childs, sitting in the ashes, silently staring at each other, uncertain who is still human. 14. An alternate ending was filmed as a precaution. The film actually had a different ending filmed as a backup in case audiences reacted negatively to the official version. Editor Todd Ramsey worried that the bleak, ambiguous ending where MacReady and Childs sit amid the ashes with no one knowing who is human might disappoint viewers. He suggested that Carpenter shoot an alternate scene in which MacReady is rescued and taken to a laboratory where his blood is tested and proves he is not assimilated, providing a clear and satisfying conclusion. However, Carpenter ultimately refused to use this ending. He believed that The Thing's power lay in ambiguity, forcing the audience to debate for decades who is still human and who has become the creature. The open, suspicious and pessimistic ending reflected the film's essence in the world of the thing trust is a luxury, and the line between human and monster is terrifyingly thin. This bold decision created one of the most haunting and discussed endings in horror cinema history, cementing the film as a sci-fi horror landmark. 13. The horrifying secret behind the Norris Thing scene. The Norris Thing scene in the film is clear evidence of Rob Bottin's talent in special effects. To create the scene of Dr. Copper having his arm bitten off while attempting to resuscitate Norris, Bottin designed a chest model with hydraulics so that the chest jaw could actually open and close. The bitten arms were made from wax rubber gelatin and fake bones, while the body of the Doctor was portrayed by a real stuntman who had lost his arms wearing a silicone mask of actor Richard Dysart for realism. When the mechanical jaw closed, the fake arms exploded, along with fake blood and organs, creating a scene both terrifying and convincingly realistic. After that scene, Norris's head begins to detach from his body and crawl away, a segment equally haunting. To achieve the effect of a stretching and breaking neck, Bottin's team used a mixture of molten plastic balloons and gum microwaved. However, these materials were flammable, causing the head model to catch fire during filming. The accident ended up creating a fantastic smoke and flame effect, which Carpenter decided to keep in the film. 12. How Carpenter kept the film's secrets. One factor that makes John Carpenter's The Thing so haunting, and now considered a paranoia masterpiece, is how he kept secrets from both the audience and the characters. Carpenter understood that in a story where anyone could be the monster, the greatest fear doesn't come from seeing the creature, but from not knowing who is possessed. Therefore, he intentionally structured the film so that even the audience became victims of suspicion. In some scenes, we clearly know who is the thing and when assimilation occurs. In others, Carpenter deliberately keeps everything in darkness, no explanation, no clear hints. A famous example is the scene before the dog kennel. After the infected dog roams the base, the audience sees it quietly enter someone's room. Dim lighting shows only a shadow cast on the wall, and Carpenter never reveals who it is. This is considered the moment the creature begins infiltrating the American group. But instead of using a main cast actor, Carpenter hired an extra just to create the shadow, ensuring that no one, even the actors, knew the identity of the first infected. This small choice has led to endless debate among fans. Was it Clark, Norris, Bennings, or Palmer? And this ambiguity maintains the film's atmosphere of paranoia and suspicion until the very last scene. Carpenter and the post-production team also used sound to deepen the feeling of absolute unease. The kennel scene is a classic example. When the thing begins revealing itself among the other dogs, barking, whining and howling erupt in a chaotic torrent, making the audience feel as if trapped in a nightmare. Little known fact, the dog sounds are entirely real. Sound designer Colin Moore recorded a group of stray dogs in his home wearing a long coat and hat, tapping on windows to scare them. The frantic howls and barks became the eerie background for the scene, so realistic that many believed Carpenter had used effects or studio simulations. 11. Carpenter was not the first choice. Few know that John Carpenter was not the first choice to direct The Thing 1982. When the project was launched, producers Lawrence Terman and David Foster were eager to bring Carpenter on board, admiring his tense and dark style in Halloween 1978. However, Universal Pictures, the production company, had other plans. At the time, they had just signed a long-term contract with director Tobe Hooper, who had shocked the world with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 1974, believing Hooper would be a better fit to revive John W. Campbell's classic sci-fi horror story, Who Goes There? Universal assigned the project to Hooper and screenwriter Kim Henkel, co-author of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. However, the two script drafts they submitted were rejected. One strayed too far from the source, leaning toward a space adventure. The other was deemed too weird and lacking in horror. After months of stagnation, the project was nearly frozen. At this point, Turman and Foster lobbied Universal to reconsider Carpenter, who was emerging as the king of independent horror after the success of Halloween and Escape from New York. Finally, Universal agreed to hand the project to Carpenter, and this decision completely changed the fate of The Thing. Carpenter approached the work with the intention of staying more faithful to Campbell's story, a tale not just about an alien monster, but about fear, paranoia, and human survival instincts when faced with the incomprehensible. He eliminated the adventure elements Hooper proposed, focusing instead on the enclosed space, cold and isolation of Antarctica, where humans are put in a situation of anyone could be the enemy. 10. Hooper's script was very different. In Hooper's draft, the alien had no shape-shifting or assimilation ability. It was simply a man-eating monster described as a physical threat rather than a metaphorical or psychological one. The story revolved around a character called the Captain, obsessed with hunting and destroying the creature, a figure resembling Captain Ahab in Moby Dick. Structurally, the film was written more like a monster-hunting epic than a horror story about suspicion and isolation. Some details in Hooper's draft were considered too strange and out of place. Producer Lawrence Turman recalled that his script contained unnecessary humorous elements, including a scene where a character is caught by the Thing after slipping on a banana peel. Hooper also intended to make the film a comedy horror with adventure elements which confused the producers. A Universal insider bluntly commented it would have been one of the worst films ever made. When Hooper's scripts were repeatedly rejected, the project stalled until Universal returned to John Carpenter, fresh from the success of Halloween and Escape from New York. Carpenter took the opposite approach. He turned The Thing into a cold, enclosed story full of paranoia, where the enemy could wear your face. This decision not only saved the project from failure, but also created a horror sci-fi masterpiece, defining Carpenter's style and profoundly influencing subsequent horror cinema. 9. The character Windows almost didn't exist. An interesting little-known fact is that the character name Windows was not in the original script. Actor Thomas G. Waits, who played the radio operator at the research station, actually came up with the name himself. During rehearsals, Waits often wore sunglasses to the point that his colleagues jokingly said they never saw his eyes. It was Waits who proactively suggested, "I want everyone to call me Windows from now on." John Carpenter liked the idea so much that he officially changed the character's name in the script. Windows ultimately became one of the most memorable characters in the film, a lonely, anxious technician who meets a tragic death when assimilated by the Thing and then burned by his own teammates. Although it was just an impromptu detail, Waits naming the character helped him create a unique presence in the film's dark setting. Do you like this character? Share your thoughts. 8. Kurt Russell almost didn't star in the film. Many people are impressed by Kurt Russell's role as MacReady in The Thing, but the truth is that Russell was not the first choice for the role. Initially, Universal and director John Carpenter considered many other famous names like Christopher Walken, Jeff Bridges, and Nick Nolte, but none truly fit the image of a gritty pilot in a frozen hell. It wasn't until June 1981, when pre-production was nearly complete, that Russell was selected. To prepare for the role, he grew his hair and beard for nearly a year, creating the rugged, wild appearance of a man accustomed to solitude and the cold of Antarctica. Russell brought a strong and defiant presence to MacReady, and he also helped shape the character's personality with very specific details. He often took a deep drag from a cigarette just before Carpenter yelled action, so that the cold breath would be visible on screen, enhancing the harshness of the environment. In the scene where MacReady and Copper fly to the Norwegian research camp, Russell even personally piloted the helicopter for a shorter time with the real pilot's permission. If you look closely, you can see the plane wobble slightly as he handles the controls. The role of Macready became one of Kurt Russell's iconic performances, moving him from his previous youthful star image to a familiar face in action horror films. Russell and Carpenter later became long-term collaborators on subsequent films and close friends. 7. Extremely complicated copyright issues. The copyright history of The Thing is one of the most complicated and unusual cases in Hollywood history. The film, directed by John Carpenter, was originally initiated by producers David Foster and Lawrence Terman, aiming to remake John W. Campbell Jr.'s story, Who Goes There More Faithfully. However, from the preparation stage, they encountered a legal maze regarding the ownership of the original story and the remake rights of the classic 1951 film, The Thing from Another World by RKO Pictures. Initially, the adaptation rights for Who Goes There belonged to screenwriters Hal Barwood and Matthew Robbins, but they had no intention of producing a new project. Universal Pictures had to purchase the rights from them to continue developing the script. Meanwhile, the rights to remake the 1951 film, including the name The Thing and identifiable elements from that version, were held by an independent producer named Wilbur Stark. Stark had purchased the remake rights of 23 RKO films, including The Thing from Another World, from 3 Wall Street finance companies that didn't know what to do with these assets. Due to the overlap between story adaptation rights and film remake rights, Universal had to negotiate and acquire the rights from Wilbur Stark to legally proceed with the project. As a result, the copyright of The Thing 1982 passed through multiple layers of ownership, from the story author to the 2 screenwriters to Universal via financiers Wilbur Stark, and finally back to Universal. This situation led to Wilbur Stark being credited as an executive producer, even though he was barely involved in production. 6. The plot was revealed in the first few minutes of the film. The opening scene of the film is one of the rare cases in cinema history where the entire core of the story is revealed within the first few minutes, yet the audience does not realize it. The film begins with a dog running through the white snow of Antarctica, being chased by 2 men in a helicopter. One of the men continuously shoots and throws grenades at the dog, making the audience think they are either insane or cruel. When the helicopter lands near the American research station Outpost 31, one of the Norwegians shoots at the group of American scientists, prompting Commander Gary to respond and kill him. The story seems to begin with a tragic misunderstanding, but in reality, at that moment, the film has revealed its entire secret. If the viewer understands Norwegian, they would know that the man is actually shouting a warning. He says, "Get away from that dog. It's not a dog. It's something else. Stay away from it, idiots." A desperate warning that no one at the American station understands. They only see a stranger attacking them and act in self-defense. This language barrier causes both the audience and characters to experience the same state of confusion. This opening scene was designed by John Carpenter with extreme subtlety. It both reveals the entire story and preserves the sense of mystery. The truth is right before our eyes. An alien creature has infiltrated. But because of the language barrier, this truth is completely useless. This creates a deep metaphor for isolation and helplessness in communication, a theme running throughout the entire film. Carpenter once said he wanted the audience to feel cold and lonely from the very first frame, and the image of the dog running under the white snow, chased to the ends of the world, is a symbolic representation of that feeling. Did you understand this the first time you watched it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. 5. The music created absolute terror. The music of The Thing is what made the film haunting and distinct. This is a rare case in John Carpenter's career where he did not compose the score himself. Carpenter was famous for his cold, minimalist electronic style in Halloween, Escape from New York, and The Fog. However, with The Thing, the massive production workload and pressure from Universal led him to delegate this role to another composer, the legendary Ennio Morricone, known for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and Once Upon a Time in the West. When Carpenter flew to Rome to meet Morricone, he brought along the Escape from New York score to demonstrate the style he wanted, minimalist industrial cold electronics, rather than Morricone's usual grand symphonic style. Morricone composed various tracks from fully orchestrated tense pieces to minimal segments with only a few electronic beats resembling a heartbeat. Carpenter later commented, "He used too many notes for the main theme. I told him to simplify. The result was a main score with just 2 low beats resonating like the heartbeat of a creature stalking in the dark, simple but terrifyingly effective." Although Morricone composed over an hour of music for the film, many tracks were unused. Carpenter felt some were too grandiose for the isolated, icy atmosphere, so he and collaborator Alan Howarth added short, electronic background pieces instead. Some discarded tracks were later reused in The Hateful Eight, the film that earned Morricone his first Oscar in a nearly 60-year career. Morricone once recounted, "I asked Carpenter, 'Why invite me if you're going to do it yourself?' And he replied, 'Because I am married to your music.'" Interestingly, the score was initially critically panned and even nominated for a Golden Raspberry for Worst Musical Score. Yet today, it is regarded as one of the finest soundtracks of the 1980s. It encapsulates the loneliness, paranoia, and invisible fear conveyed by the film, a sound that makes the listener feel as though the thing is watching them in the dark. 4. The film was not shot in Antarctica. Although The Thing is set at a remote Antarctic research station, the film was not actually shot there. Instead, John Carpenter and the crew recreated the frozen environment at various locations in North America. Interior scenes were filmed on Universal Studios sound stages in Los Angeles, where the production designers built the entire research station from wood and steel. To enhance realism, Carpenter requested that the stages be cooled to about 28 degrees Celsius while using humidifiers and portable air conditioners to create visible condensation in the air. This ensured that the actor's breath on screen was 100% real, even when outdoor temperatures were over 38 degrees. Exterior shots, including blizzards and action sequences outside the station, were filmed in Stewart, British Columbia, Canada, and Juneau, Alaska. These areas near Salmon Glacier offered majestic scenery and year-round snow, perfectly recreating the sense of isolation in the frozen wilderness. Filming here was challenging. Harsh weather often froze camera lenses, and on one occasion, a crew bus nearly slid off a 150-metre cliff due to icy roads. The extreme conditions, however, contributed to a rare sense of realism where every breath and glance was steeped in fear and despair. Dean Cundy, the cinematographer, said Carpenter deliberately chose British Columbia because it was close enough to the pole for real snow, but not so remote that equipment couldn't reach it. Once outdoor filming ended, Carpenter had the station completely dismantled and blown up for the climactic final shot, a choice that saved costs and made the scene more convincing. Before filming, Carpenter also required all actors to train for 2 weeks on the cold set to truly experience the fatigue, tension, and paranoia of people isolated in a frozen hell. How do you feel about this fact? Interesting, right? Leave a comment below. 3. A double amputee was used to create the special effects in the film. Do you remember the horrifying chest bite scene where Dr. Copper tries to revive Norris with a defibrillator? When he presses the metal plates onto the patient's chest, Norris's chest suddenly opens, revealing a massive jaw that bites off Copper's arms in an instant. This scene became one of the most impressive and shocking practical effects sequences in horror cinema history, leaving audiences at the time unable to believe what they were seeing. To create this chillingly realistic effect, special effects artist Rob Bottin, who later became famous for RoboCop Total Recall, and 7N decided to use a stuntman who had lost both arms in a work accident. The man was fitted with 2 prosthetic forearms made from wax bones, rubber veins, and jello, and then wore a silicone mask moulded from Richard Dysart's face to fully transform into Dr. Copper. On set, the prosthetic arms were placed inside the monster's mechanical chest cavity, which contained a hydraulically controlled jaw. When the victim pulled his arms out, the jaw snapped shut, cutting the prosthetic forearms in half, achieving a terrifyingly realistic effect without digital effects. Bottin once shared that this scene was one of the biggest challenges of his career, not only due to its technical complexity, but also because he had to ensure absolute safety for the stuntman. Even Carpenter admitted he was shocked when watching this sequence in the first cut, as its realism exceeded all expectations. Were you impressed by this scene? Share your thoughts in the comments below. 2. Kurt Russell nearly killed himself on set. In the climactic scene near the end of The Thing, Kurt Russell almost had a serious accident using real explosives on set. In this segment, MacReady throws a stick of dynamite at the giant monster inside the research station. However, Russell did not expect the explosion to be much stronger than planned. When it detonated, the blast force hurled Russell violently backward, and the stunned, panicked reaction seen on screen is entirely real. According to the crew and behind-the-scenes documentation, John Carpenter decided to keep the shot in the final cut because it added complete authenticity. 1. A box office flop and panned by critics. When released in June 1982, John Carpenter's The Thing became one of the most painful failures of his career. The film had a budget of around $15 million, but only grossed just over $14 million in North America, far below Universal Pictures' expectations. Carpenter later admitted at the 2013 Cape Town Film Festival, "The film was a complete failure on release. Fans hated it. They thought I was terrible violent. I lost my job, everyone hated me. But now, over 30 years later, you're filling theatres to watch it. The main reason for The Thing's failure was its release timing. Just 2 weeks earlier, Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial had become a global phenomenon, presenting an image of a kind, benevolent alien with a warm, hopeful ending. In contrast, Carpenter's The Thing presented a completely opposite image. A malicious alien hiding in human bodies, bringing isolation, distrust, and extreme fear. Audiences in 1982 still caught up in E.T. His optimistic frenzy were not ready for a cold, pessimistic film with no room for trust. Carpenter said, "I made a really dark and exhausting film, and I don't think the 1982 audience wanted to see it. They wanted to see E.T., and The Thing was the opposite." Critics at the time were also unforgiving. Vincent Canby of the New York Times described the film as absurd, gloomy, mixing horror and sci-fi to create something both interesting and unappealing. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times gave it 2.54 stars, calling it a wonderfully silly film, but disappointing because of shallow characters and irrational behaviour of the scientists. Most reviews argued that Carpenter focused too much on practical effects and gruesome scenes, causing character and emotional depth to fade. For audiences of the time, the images of ripped flesh, exploding heads, transforming bodies were too shocking and unfamiliar for mainstream entertainment. It wasn't until many years later that audiences and critics began to recognise it as a pioneering work on survival fear isolation and human suspicion. Rob Bottin's practical effects were praised as masterful in horror cinema, while Carpenter's storytelling style became the benchmark for horror of paranoia. From a miserable failure, The Thing has been restored to its reputation and is now regarded as one of the greatest horror sci-fi films of all time. So we have just explored 15 fascinating facts from scenes that nearly sent Kurt Russell flying to how John Carpenter kept secrets to create extreme paranoia. Every behind-the-scenes detail shows the dedication, creativity and daring of the Thing's team, a film once hated on release, now celebrated as a pinnacle of horror. What about you? Among these 15 facts which impressed you the most, the horrifying chest bite scene, Ennio Morricone's haunting score, or the real explosion that nearly threw Kurt Russell off set? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss future videos where we'll continue uncovering untold secrets behind legendary films.